Welcome to Legacy Builders, strategies for building successful family enterprises. Brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. I'm your host, Corey Gagnon, Senior Wealth Advisor. And on this show, we explore global ideas, concepts, and models to help family enterprises better navigate the complexities of family wealth. Today, we welcome Russ Haworth, family business advisor at UK-based The Family Business Partnership. Russ is a seasoned advisor with nearly 2 decades of experience empowering families and their enterprises. Leveraging his expertise in financial planning and wealth management, Russ guides clients towards success. Recognized as an industry leader, Russ holds the Advanced Certificate in Family Business Advising from the Family Firm Institute. In addition to his client work, Russ co-directs the Quest for Legitimacy, a global research initiative focused on helping the next generation of family business leaders. He also hosts the acclaimed Family Business Podcast and serves on the advisory board of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. My goal is to be the most curious person in today's conversation with Russ Haworth, where we explore his wealth of experience in guiding families of wealth through complex decisions and multi-generational challenges. We'll discuss how Russ's pioneering work in establishing effective governance frameworks has led him to reimagine the role of the family advisor, focusing on fostering collective responsibility and personal accountability. Together, we'll uncover how Russ helps families cultivate grit, resilience, and interpersonal connections needed to successfully navigate the complexities of wealth preservation and legacy planning across generations. Now, let's dive in. Welcome, Russ. We're excited to have you here today to share your wealth of knowledge and experiences with us. Let's dive in, shall we?
Sounds great.
Russ, imagine you're delivering the commencement speech to the graduating class of 2024, and you have the chance to inspire them with your story. How would you begin your speech to convey the incredible lessons and expertise that you've gained along your career?
It's a great question. It's a brilliant, thought-provoking way to kind of bring out some stories. And in preparation, it really made me think about ways in which I could tell stories from my life to help articulate this. So the underlying message is that I believe we can achieve far more than we perhaps give ourselves credit for, that we believe that we can. And there's 3 quick stories I'd like to share with you to help highlight that. One is, or the first 2 are personal achievements physically. So I have trained and run a marathon, and I've cycled what's called Land's End John O'Groats here in the UK, which is the southwestmost point to the northeastmost point. And that's about 1,000 miles for cycling. And if you'd have asked me before in either of those 2, could you do that? My answer would be no. But I got encouraged to do them, shall we say.
Yep.
And the preparation and training and everything that goes into it creates the possibility of you actually doing it. And I remember, I remember very distinctly running the last few hundred yards of the London Marathon, saying to myself, you've done it. And I'd never have believed, even though I trained well and I got to the start line, I never really believed until I could do it that I was going to. You hear lots of stories about hitting the wall and your legs giving up and having to walk. I actually sped up in the last half of the marathon. I overtook something like 3,000 people in the last 5K. You get all these stats from your chips as you're running it. And I couldn't believe that I was able to do that. And I think that's a real lesson in terms of what I've then taken into my business life, is that if you've got the determination and the resilience, you can achieve so much more than perhaps you give yourself credit for. And that was taken into a business context when I started my own business, because I started that right at the very beginning of COVID.
Right.
And when I handed my notice in to my employer, I had a 3 month notice period, and COVID wasn't really a thing. There was a little bit of it in the news, but it wasn't upon us in the same way as it became in early spring that year. And so I launched a face-to-face consultancy business in full lockdown here in the UK. That wasn't something I had in my business plan.
Right.
So as I was talking about the planning and the preparation, I had nothing like this in my planning, my preparation. But what I did have is a belief and a grit and a resilience that was built through that adversity that has prepared me for challenges like that. And I think that's the key message of getting across is learning from that, taking those experiences that help create grit and resilience are fantastic ways to prepare you for overcoming any challenge. Doesn't make them any easier, but you've got that belief and that faith that you can go through those challenges. And that's the message I would give out is if there's enough belief and grit and resilience, we can overcome a lot more than we give ourselves credit for.
Amazing. And so tell me a little bit about that feeling nearing the finish line of the marathon and saying you've done it. You haven't yet crossed, and somehow your brain said, "That's it. You've accomplished this," because you could see the finish line, or you were nearing the finish line. How does that? How did that change your mindset after that, Russ?
But I felt really emotional running down that. It's the London Marathon, and the way you ended, you turn a corner outside Buckingham Palace, and you run down towards this big archway that has the time above it. And there's loads of thousands of runners doing it. So
Yeah.
it's a really, although it's I think 25, 30,000 people run it. It's a very individual thing when you're running up that last bit because you've had all the training and the preparation that have gone into being in that position. It may have helped that just before that point, so maybe 100, 200 yards sort of on the corner, I saw my other half and her dad waving and shouting and cheering. And you kind of get that feeling of, I can't believe I've done it, even though I've trained for it, even though I've prepared for it. I hadn't prepared for that feeling of running down the last 200 odd yards as you go around that corner. And after that, the feeling of a little bit of isolation, a little bit of loneliness, because although I've achieved it and I'm elated,
Yes.
there's no one with you because you've crossed the finishing line. There's other athletes and other runners that have crossed the finish line, but you're on your own in that situation. And it wasn't until maybe half an hour later when I caught up with my family that I was able to share that experience and share that feeling. So it went from kind of elation to a little bit of isolation and reflection, back to elation and celebration with the family. And again, I think that's a valuable lesson is all we have is moment. We have the present moment, and being present in that moment is such an important element. And recognizing that in order to feel that elation, sometimes you need to feel that there's that little bit of loneliness and isolation too. And I don't want to be kind of all doom and gloom about it. I want this
Yeah.
to be a positive side, but it was a really interesting reflection for me to have that feeling of, okay, now what?
Right.
Because it's kind of done. And this was just seconds after crossing the line and making sure you stop your watch so that you get your time and what have you. So yeah, it's an interesting reflection.
And so Russ, that feeling of isolation, the training that you'd done presumably was with others who either had done the marathon before or coaches from some perspective, either live or programs. And so in that there can be support for people in their lives where they're training and they're with others. And you mentioned the after the fact that you're celebrating with your family, but there is that moment where that grit and that individual resilience has to be built to get you across the finish line and that feeling. How does that translate to some of the work that you've done and how that relates to families?
So I think it's a really interesting point in terms of particularly with a family and a family business. The family are a collective, right?
Yes.
They're a group of people, and so they share some collective responsibility for what's happening within their family business. But also, there should be an emphasis on personal responsibility and the fact that there's lots of training plans for marathons. There's lots of training plans to be able to cycle 1,000 miles. But if you don't take the personal responsibility to do the work, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So it's same is true in so you mentioned about training in a group. But for the cycle ride, we trained in a group, but we all had to do the work. So if, for example, I'd taken the viewpoint of I don't need to train because everyone else is training, that will make the execution really easy because everyone else has done the training. I wouldn't have lasted the first day on that bike ride.
Yes.
And so, although there's an individual challenge that I had to take personal responsibility for, part of the beauty of being in a family business is you've got others to share that journey with. So, in contrast, the marathon was, I felt very individual, I felt very on my own in that sense. But the long bike ride, the Land's End to John O'Groats bike ride, I felt part of something because there was 12 of us that were doing it, and we all went through different stages on that journey. There were some people on, I had my very low points where I was thinking, how am I going to get through this? There was one day where I woke up and thought, I can't get back on the bike. It was like day three, I think, or even day two. And I thought, I can't get back on this bike. And yet again, that feeling of all of us in a line cycling towards the finishing line was incredible. And we all had our own battles and our own experience, but it was something that was collective as well. And I think, again, that's the beauty of a family business is you have your own experience, but it's shared with those that are closest to you. But that I think the key message around there is a collective responsibility, but there's very much a personal responsibility. There is a very valuable message.
Right. And what about that responsibility of you to the others? If there was 12 of you, you had that responsibility to yourself to train, but there was also some sort of teamwork. How does that come into play with
Yeah,
family?
so I can share a story. Again, it's I'm part of a charity group, and we do challenges each year generally to raise money for charity. So the Land's End John O'Groats was one of those. The marathon wasn't. That was something separate. But a previous challenge prior to Land's End John O'Groats was a more modest cycling challenge. You had to run 10 miles and then cycle 60 and then canoe, I don't know, 15 miles down a canal. And I trained for the running bit, and I thought, well, cycling's easy because you're on a bike. And I got about a mile into the cycle ride and cramped up. And luckily, I had a very close friend who was able to sacrifice or willing to sacrifice his event to support me in really struggling with mine. And I think that's a really valuable lesson that I've taken away is I took for granted that there was elements of what was needed that was more straightforward than they were.
Right.
And as a result, I let people down. I was fortunate that I had somebody who was able to stay back, if you like, and pretty much push me up the hills because it was that kind of thing where I just couldn't move on the bike. And that's a valuable lesson in exactly what you were saying is there is that collective responsibility and collective feeling of we're in this together, therefore we should all be putting in the required effort in order
Right.
for it to be successful. I didn't do that, and it was very apparent of the impact that had. And I think again that's true in families. Is if you don't take the personal responsibility amongst the collective, and that means that you perhaps letting people down, it has a knock-on impact. It has an impact on in this case, a family system. In the case of my bike ride, my friend who had to sacrifice, he was an extremely proficient cyclist. And so he had to sacrifice that in order to support me because I'd taken for granted what was needed in order to do it well.
Right. And how about the relationship after the fact, Russ? He made that sacrifice, and we see family members do this in support of the system. And and so how did you, or how could somebody in that situation really support the fact that somebody sacrificed personal achievement for the greater good of the collective?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the action I took. So I set out that we did this in legs. So we ran a leg, then we cycled a leg. We were doing a tour of highest peaks in the county that I live in. And so I got to the second one and said, I need to stop now because I can't continue to let you guys down. So I got in the support vehicles, and although I did the canoeing bit because that didn't involve the legs that I'd been using up
Right.
until that point, um, I decided to sit out so that he could complete the rest in normal fashion as opposed to having to hold himself back from there. It, in some ways, it helped to cement our friendship. We're great friends to today. I think where it can manifest negatively is that there's a temptation for him to hold a grudge.
Right.
Now, we were all doing this for a charity. So at the end of the day, the charity got the money that we raised so that it was a positive outcome. But had that been, say, a race, or had that been something that had real value or importance connected to his personal achievement on that, it would be very easy for him to hold a grudge on that. And that could have tainted our relationship for years. We actually did the Lantern John O'Groats bike ride together. And again, we had times where he was supporting me, we were cycling alongside each other, and he's a far better cyclist than I'll ever be. But had he held a grudge from that previous experience, we wouldn't have had the same experience on the Land's End John O'Groats ride. So it's a testament to his character. But again, that's a charity environment rather than it being something that, could lead to the failure or success of a business.
Right.
And that comes with a much higher emotional attachment that could potentially lead to tarnishing that relationship for years to come. And he's with every right to say, come on, you owe me one here.
Right.
I literally pushed you up a hill. You need to help me out on something. I think that's the danger of when you let people down, is that it can lead to there being the presence of some form of grudge, or at least a tainting of that relationship.
Absolutely. And so we're talking about low stakes environment here. And it it takes me back to your comment of preparation. And so in this circumstance, we're talking about low risk, it's for charity. Um, and but the thing is there, in family business, there's a lot at stake. So from that, are there things that families can be doing where they can lower the stakes, have that ability to build some of that muscle, and be ready for when the stakes are high? Is there a way that the families listening can really bring that lesson and somehow allow the individuals and collective to grow?
Yeah, so a couple of points on that. Firstly, I two kind of strands to my work. Firstly, I help families implement and create effective governance for them to be able to have the right conversations in the right places with the right people.
Yeah.
It's perhaps an oversimplified view of governance. And to me, that helps to create the right forums and the right environments for perhaps some of those more trickier questions that can sometimes make their way into the business in other forms. So if there's a disagreement between, say, two siblings, and they happen to work in the business or work together, that can permeate into the business and affect everybody within that business. So helping them create the governance and the forums to have that so that it doesn't do that helps them to prepare.
Yes.
Within that, there's a collective responsibility of going, what do we need to create in order to help us move things forward and achieve what we want to achieve? But there's also the personal responsibility of doing the work themselves in order to get that result. Again, it's a bit like having a personal trainer and then asking them to do the press ups. You're not going to get the results.
Not at
So
all.
doing the work yourself is the way to really make it stick and make it impactful within their family business. Similarly, a lot of my work is focused around a project that I worked on called the Quest for Legitimacy, which is essentially a research project that looked at the impact of growing up in a prominent family. So we would consider family businesses as having a sense of prominence because typically your name is associated with it, or what your family do within the community is associated with you, and that can cast a shadow. And that's a very individual experience as well. Although we spoke to 25 rising children from across the globe and they had similar experiences, they all felt that similar sense of isolation that I had when I crossed the finishing line. I crossed that line along with 30 or 40,000 people, but I felt as if I was the only one that had that experience at that time. And that's something that came across in the research that we did. Because although this is common, people feel as if they're the only ones going through it. And so, again, families can have that collective responsibility to help nurture their rising generation, but it's also partly down to the individual responsibility to be able to do something. I'll just say one thing on that. A lot of family business theory is sort of within the realms of systems theory. So the family is a system.
Right.
And whilst that's true, everybody within that system is also an individual. And I think it's important to think of it as a both and rather than an either or. Not that I'm an individual, so I need to forget about the system side, or we're in a system, therefore I need to forget about the individual side. It's the combination of that and looking at it as a both and rather than an either or. Is an important way to help families navigate what can we do collectively that we can celebrate and be fantastic in growing wealth and growing a business together. And if that's for me within that, brilliant. If it's not, then what can I do outside of that? What can I do outside of that, even if I'm part of the business, to have fulfillment and value in my own life? That I think is, again, an important conversation to be having.
Right. And so within the system, oftentimes there is a champion and somebody who either is pushing forward, and it might not be a somebody, it might be a collective that is saying, it's time to get on the bike. We need to go training, and everyone's saying, no, I want to sleep. What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's the sun's not even up yet, sort of thing. And so in that, where is that balance of that individual of I'm ready, let's do this, and the system needs to somewhat keep up to the individual? Like there's got to be some sort of pace there of balance. Is there any kind of take on that, Russ?
Yeah. So again, if I can lean back into my example of the charity bike ride, we all had the same goal. We all had the same mission.
Yeah.
So we wanted to complete 1,000-mile bike ride. So when somebody was really enthusiastic and come on, I know it's raining and the wind's blowing at 90 miles an hour straight into your face, but let's go out and train. We could all muster the enthusiasm and energy needed because we had the same goal. If somebody turns up to my house on a Sunday morning now and suggests going for a bike ride in the wet and cold, because I don't have that goal, I'm not going to do that. So I think, again, in terms of the family context, if there's a common goal, a mission that you are trying to achieve as a family, then that motivation is there. The ambition is there to go, okay, we want to create something that creates wealth for multiple generations of our family, to use a straightforward example. Therefore, I know from a personal responsibility perspective, I need to do the work.
Right.
I need to do the training, because if I don't, then we're less likely to hit that goal than if I was to do that work. So I think that's where there's kind of a crossover on that side. Everybody that started that marathon that year had the same goal. Now, we didn't all train together, 40,000 of us, because that would be impractical.
Right.
But we all trained, we all did the work, and we put in the preparation and what was needed, so that you do the reading to go, well, when this gets tough, how am I going to react? What do I need to do as I go along this journey in order to try and stave off muscle fatigue and hitting the wall and all the kind of cramps and negative things that can come along. There's lots you can do earlier in the journey. And again, from a family perspective, in terms of governance, you can do a lot in terms of preparation and doing the work early on. That means when those difficult times do inevitably arise, you're better prepared for them. It doesn't mean
Right.
they disappear, but it means you're better prepared. You're better able to face those and navigate those together because you've done the work together beforehand. So yeah, I think that's perhaps where there's some synergy with getting up on a Sunday morning in the howling wind to ride a bike and
Right.
operating a family business together.
And now, one of the things you mentioned about the training is stories. People telling their stories of what it would feel like at certain points. And what you've done as a collective in this research is brought these stories forward of these families across the globe and a common feeling. And so within that, there's a gift of these stories that allow people to not feel like they're the only one feeling that. But there's also other members in the family who maybe have already accomplished that or found their own strategies. Are there ways within the family that you've seen that successful storytelling and passing on some of those lessons?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because we the work that I do with the quest for legitimacy is spearheaded by a fantastic colleague called Dr. Jamie Weiner. He's a psychologist based out of Chicago, and the idea behind the research was very much his idea to challenge some of the misconceptions that can come out around entitled youth and trust fund brats and the kind of horror stories that you hear around entitlement wasn't something he was seeing in his work. So he embarked on the research to try and understand the lived experience of people growing up in that environment. And utilizing some of the stories from there, we spoke to people who felt as though they grew up in the shadow of a giant. Now, the giant in their life could be a parent, for example. But one of the things that I think it's really key to understand, and very much to your point around the sharing of stories, is everybody who's a giant in someone's life is just going through life for the first time themselves anyway.
Yes.
So they have gone through trials and tribulations and errors and really difficult times, and they've navigated that and created the grit and perseverance needed for that to be or to result in success that then creates that shadow. And what we tend to find is a lot of the work that's done around families is then to protect the wealth and to stop the mistakes that can risk the depletion of that wealth, which is important work. We're not diminishing the importance of that work.
Yes.
But it does restrict the ability for people to learn from mistakes. If there's too much of a kind of a structure around everything that you can never make a mistake and you're protected from the realities of the world, it can lead to that kind of lack of grit and resilience. So one of the things we're suggesting with families is for the founders or the people who have cast the shadow to share their stories about how they did that. What are the mistakes that they made? What did they learn from? What are some of the really difficult times that they've had to navigate, and how did they do that? Because, I mean, we've all been through a global pandemic in the recent past, and yet I can't imagine everybody sat down talking to the giants in their lives about how did you navigate? How did you get through it?
Right.
And it can be a really important part of the development for those individuals to understand that the giant is a human after all. You see the Wizard of Oz where they pull back the curtain.
Absolutely.
And it's similar to that, right? In that there's a humanness in there that provides a reassurance that it's okay to go through challenges and not know the answer to everything. And sometimes we can build people up onto a pedestal and go, I'm never going to be able to live up to their achievements because they've got all the answers. They've never made mistakes. They've never had to deal with the same sort of adversity that I am. And storytelling is a great way to remove that myth and really create connection between generations as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, Russ, as we near the end of our conversation, there's a few questions that I ask each guest before we wrap up. Are you ready for the tough ones?
I am indeed.
All right. The first is, what is one key strategy you believe is most essential for building successful family enterprises?
I may be biased in this answer, but for me, building effective and appropriate governance sets the foundation for navigating the challenges that inevitably any business is going to face. Having that tailored to the complexities that come from being in business with your family means that you're better able to navigate that together and continue on your journey towards what it is you're looking to achieve. So my answer there would be to build effective and appropriate governance, and the appropriate words, the important one there, rather than just having some government for the sake of it. It needs to serve a purpose.
Right. And what would that look like in place on maybe the
So
simplest terms? Because we could go to very complicated
yeah.
examples here.
A very simple example, again, speaking back to what we are saying about the ambition for us to cycle that lands into dry growth, having a shared vision as a family. There can be a lot of assumption in place that everybody's in the family business for the same reasons. But unless you have a really clear, articulated vision and statement that says this is what we're doing, you can't know that for sure. And so it can be really empowering to harness the energy within the family in a vision statement to say this is where we're going and why we're going there. So that again, it gives you that lens to look through when it comes to doing the hard yards of the Sunday morning training rides. That's a prime example of where some governance can come in to play. One other quick one is where roles can become blurred between, say, owners and managers and family, the famous kind of three circle model, creating relevant boundaries between those roles so that the right people are having the right conversations at the right time is another way to kind of smooth some of the complexity. It doesn't make it perfect, but it helps to have some of those boundaries in place around those different roles.
Fantastic. And what is the most common challenge that you see family enterprises encountering when it comes to wealth transition and generational continuity?
Um, so for me, that perhaps one of the clearest areas is a lack of clarity around expectation. Again, the presence of assumption in those discussions, and I think that's across families and also advisors.
Yep.
I've been in situations where assumptions that I've made have been completely wrong. And because there's a lack of clarity and being really clear on this is what I want and here's my expectations and here's what I want to do, it can lead to unintended consequences further down the line. And I think that's a collective responsibility again between the individuals involved, but also the advisory community around that, is making sure people are very clear on what it is that they're trying to achieve and not have it be led by someone else's definition of success, for example. We seem to measure family success in their ability to pass trading entities down through generations. And where that's a collective ambition, brilliant. Let's do all we can to make that happen.
Yeah.
But if it's not, and we make that assumption, it can lead to challenges and people feeling trapped. So I think being really, really clear about what it is that everybody wants and creating the environments that allow those conversations to happen is a really valuable exercise for families to undertake, because doing that now can save a lot of kind of confusion and potential issues further down the line.
I love it. And in your experience, what are the top three qualities that successful family enterprise leaders possess?
Um, so for me, the first one is curiosity. Giving up the need to be right and having a curiosity to really understand a challenge, I think, is a fantastic skill in a leader, because it means you can harness opinion from elsewhere. And although you might be the leader and have kind of responsibility and decision making and responsibilities from that, if you approach all of the challenges you face with a mindset of curiosity and openness, I think it sets you up for being in a better position to make those decisions. The second I would say is honesty. And sometimes I see family, particularly with other family members, there can be a challenge in terms of being honest, in terms of a sense of candor with people to go, actually, what you're doing is not what we're expecting of you. Your performance is not what it should be. That can be a really
Right.
difficult conversation
Yep.
within a family. So I think that honesty is a really important element. I'd suggest it's kind honesty rather than it being kind of brutally honest, like you're useless, get out. That may be honest, but it's not delivered well. So I think the kindness in there as well, but also a sense of courage. So the third element I would say is courage, and that's courage in many different forms. So courage to make a decision, but also a courage to be vulnerable and to say
Right.
to people, I don't know what the answer is here. How can we get to this solution together? And creating that mindset amongst the team or whatever teams they're leading, I think is really important. So I'd summarize as curiosity, honesty, and courage, all mixed in with kindness.
Fantastic. Those
I know
are.
that's a fourth I've just chucked in, but why not?
I think it's good to clarify, because if you don't put perspective into it, it can be taken in a different way. So no, that's great. And Russ, before we conclude our discussion, I'd like to highlight where our listeners can engage in more of the conversations that you're having, as well as the conversations that you're listening to.
So I think in terms of pointing people to say a resource where I hang out a little bit, I'm the host of my own podcast. I haven't recorded many episodes recently, but there's a back catalogue of about 170 episodes available. That's imaginatively titled as the Family Business Podcast. It's, as I say, various different topics for anyone that's in business with their family. I speak to experts from all over the globe around those kind of things. So that I think is a valuable resource. I mentioned about the quest for legitimacy. You can find out a lot more about that at questforlegitimacy.com. There is also a book of the same title that was authored by my colleague, and we used the story. I say we, he wrote the book. He uses the stories that we heard from the research to brilliantly highlight the different common challenges that can come in that environment. So it's a fantastic read. Although there was some academic research to back it up, it's not an academic book. It's a storytelling book that highlights those points. So I'd recommend going there. And if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, then you can do so. I think I'm Russell Haworth on there rather than Russ Haworth, but I'm sure we can find a link somewhere.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well, for sure.
Awesome.
Great. And I wanted to make sure that we covered everything today. Our conversation went by very quickly. Is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I don't think so. I think going through the questions that you've put to me today has really made me realize the parallels that exist within marathon and long distance bike riding and successful family enterprise. So that may be something I use a little bit more in my own work with clients. So appreciate the questions that you've asked to help me realize that as well. So thank you.
Great. Well, I think that there is a connection between the body and the mind, and when people do figure that out, their performance can be exponential. So I appreciate that conversation, and thank you, Russ. I appreciate you taking the time to share your stories, your expertise, the experiences with us today. I found the conversation insightful, and I know that our listeners will find it valuable. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.
As we wrap up this episode, we invite you to reflect on the invaluable perspectives Russ has shared on the power of grit, resilience, and shared responsibility within family enterprises. Whether you are part of a family enterprise or providing consulting to family enterprises, Russ's insights underline the importance of fostering a culture of shared responsibility and resilience. Throughout our discussion, Russ highlighted the critical role of individual responsibility and collective support within family enterprises, drawing parallels from his own experiences in endurance challenges. Russ emphasized how personal grit and resilience, when combined with the shared journey of family, can lead to remarkable triumphs. Russ stressed the importance of storytelling in family businesses. By openly sharing their personal journeys, struggles, and lessons learned, family members can inspire the next generation, fostering a culture of growth, adaptability, and mutual support. Ultimately, our conversation underscored the delicate balance between individual responsibility and the collective accountability within family enterprises, empowering each member to thrive while preserving the family's enduring legacy. For families seeking to cultivate a thriving, sustainable enterprise, Russ at the Family Business Partnership is always ready to help. You can reach out to him via his website, and we've included his contact information together with additional resources in the show notes to support you on your journey. Thank you for joining me, Corey Gagnon, your host of Legacy Builders Podcast. It's my personal passion to explore with you these topics related to family wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to share this episode with family, friends, and colleagues who you care about. If you'd like to help support this show, you can do so by leaving a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything shared on today's episode, or have topics you'd like us to dive deeper into in future episodes, please let us know by emailing beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com. That's beaconfamilyoffice@ASSANTE.com. Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises is brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante. Are you worried about losing what you've created and seeking ways to transition your wealth across generations? Beacon Family Office at Asante supports our clients transition their wealth while maintaining relationships. If you'd like to access more content we've created, you can visit us at beaconfamilyoffice.com or for more details on our services and book an initial call. Thanks again for listening, and until next episode, stay intentional about building your legacy. This program was prepared by Corey Gagnon, who is a senior wealth advisor with Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. This is not an official program of Asante Financial Management, and the statements and opinions expressed during this podcast are not necessarily those of Asante Financial Management. This show is intended for general information only and may not apply to all listeners or investors. Please obtain professional financial advice or contact us at beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com or visit beaconfamilyoffice.com to discuss your particular circumstances prior to acting on the information presented.